This is E&P Reports, a service of Editor and Publisher Magazine. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing. And I'm Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P. And today, we're going to talk about ProPublica, a nonprofit organization in New York City that produces investigative journalism and partners with other news organizations. And in 2010, ProPublica was the first online news source to win a Pulitzer Prize. Today, they've partnered with over 90 news organizations and claimed 5 Pulitzers. And today we're going to talk with Rachel Glickhouse, who managed ProPublica's Documenting Hate project. And she talks to E&P now about the future of ProPublica, how they're aggregating newsrooms together and launching their new Electionland 2020 initiative. Let's join E&P's digital media columnist, Rob Torno, as he goes one-on-one with Rachel Glickhouse.
My name is Rob Torno, and I'm a reporter with the Philadelphia Inquirer and a writer for Editor and Publisher. Joining me today on the podcast is Rachel Glickhouse. Rachel is a journalist at ProPublica and just finished recently wrapping up their massive Documenting Hate project. So thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
So for people who might not be familiar with the Documenting Hate project, it went on for 3 years, produced a massive number of stories. Just kind of walk us through overview of, what you guys set out to do and what you were able to accomplish.
So what we wanted to do was to have a better idea of how many hate crimes were happening, where they were happening, but also what kind of hate incidents were happening, which are similar in that they involve someone's race, religion, that kind of thing, but may not rise to the level of a crime. So we wanted to collect as much data as we could about where hate incidents were happening, because we knew that the official data on hate crimes is lacking. That's the federal FBI data, and that there's really no national data set on hate incidents. So we wanted to see what gaps we could fill to do that. So we collected tips from the public, asking people to submit their stories directly to us so we could report them out. And we also requested a lot of data and incident reports directly from police to see what they were gathering. So in the end, we produced close to 240 stories between ProPublica and our partners. We had more than 180 partners around the country, both national and local outlets. And we gathered around 6,000 tips and hundreds of data from hundreds of police departments. So that is what we did.
About amassing other organizations to partner with you. Sometimes journalists can be sort of territorial, and there's a long history of competing for scoops. How did you guys sort of break down those barriers and get so many partners to kind of buy in and benefit ultimately from it?
So the model for these big collaborations that we do is to basically share from a pool of resources. So the main one to begin with was the tips that we were gathering, because we asked partners to help us gather those tips, so that it's a collaborative effort to crowdsource that information, so that everyone gets to ultimately benefit from what comes in. We also shared, after we finished some reporting, we shared all those public records that we got with our partners as well, so they could do their own reporting. I think essentially, because it's this sharing model, our approach is, look, everyone's going to benefit. It is up to you what reporting you ultimately want to do. And we operate on a first come, first served basis. So if a tip came in a city where we have more than one partner, the partner who requests the contact information first is the one who gets it. And then anyone who was a partner could get records that we had if they requested them. So it was ultimately, when you put the onus on reporters, it really helps, because it really depends who is available, who is interested. And that, I think, ultimately will be the deciding factor of what partners actually participate. Because it's very easy to sign up for something that's free and opt in. It is another story to actually do something as part of the project.
Right. What made Documenting Hate such an important thing for you guys to do? You know, I'm sure there's probably a number of projects you can do that you guys are already partnering. You know, I can't even count on both hands how many, you know, projects you guys have going on. What about Documenting Hate made it such an important project for you guys?
I think it's the longest collaborative project we've ever done, and one of the biggest. We started doing these big collaborations starting in 2016 with our Electionland project, and Documenting Hate grew out of that using the same model that we used. So we did Electionland again in 2018, and we're going to do it again this year. So really, Documenting Hate was sort of the first iteration of this big collaborative project that we did that was really structured around the collaboration. Electionland 2016 was kind of an experiment, and then Documenting Hate was the first time we really made it this really complete project with someone running it, and we ran it for 3 years. So I think that made it important to us, and then I think the reason it was important journalistically is to have an ongoing effort to investigate this particular issue, since there are so many different beats that are dependent on breaking news, and this was something we devoted 3 whole years to.
Right. As you said, there were sort of gaps in sort of the data. You know, what were some of the more impactful stories that you were able to get over the course of the 3 years?
So at ProPublica, one of the aspects of the reporting on our internal team was to report on white supremacists. So a lot of the reporting that was done on white supremacist groups had pretty big impact, arrests, people losing their jobs, people getting kicked out of the armed forces, things of that nature. So those were ones that had pretty clear and easy and measurable impact. We, between us and our partners, have done a lot of stories about police departments doing a bad job tracking hate crimes. And a lot of those stories, whether they were big sweeping looks or an individual city or individual police department, had at least some impact to either get them to correct their data, to embarrass them, to show what a bad job they were doing.
Right.
We had quite a few of those between us and our partners, showing various different types of ways of why they were doing a bad job at this. And I think those were some important ones.
With big projects, like at newspapers, when they have Pulitzer projects or big projects like this, there's a tendency sometimes for things to just kind of keep going without an end date, without an end sight. How did you guys know that now was the right time to sort of, okay, we did what we set out to do, we're good to go, we're going to move on to something else?
Oh, it was just funding. Our funding ran out.
Okay. That's easy enough.
Yeah. And then we got funding for the election project. So in nonprofit media, we are a bit beholden to our funding mechanisms. For big collaborative projects, we tend to get specific funding for them. So that's the only reason.
So with Election, you're going to be managing the Electionland project this year. And as you said, you've done it 2 cycles already. What kind of stuff have you learned from the previous 2 cycles, and what kind of ground are you trying to cover in 2020?
So I think in 2016, everyone was caught by surprise by some of the big issues that ultimately came out of that, like how important misinformation was and the attacks on the election system. And there were a lot of things that happened that I don't know everyone was prepared for. And we were very prepared for that in 2018. But there's always new issues that come up. So I think we learned to prepare for the things that happened in the last election, but also just try to be prepared to deal with things that are unexpected and that we're going to have to perhaps go back to the drawing board and sort of figure out how to act on the fly. So a good example from 2018 was New York has some voting issues, but one thing that I don't think we were necessarily expecting was that on election day, it was raining a lot in New York City, and the ballots were getting wet, and it jammed machines in multiple polling places all over the city. Wow. And it caused huge lines. People were really annoyed. There was long waiting times in some places. So that's something I don't think we necessarily would have thought, okay, we need to be prepared for this particular thing. But once it happened, we were able to work collectively to report it out, identify the polling places that were affected, and try to do that as quickly as possible so that election officials could try to deal with this problem. So I think that's a big thing to be. It seems sort of vague to say that, but being prepared to deal with things of that nature, I think, is really important. Things that aren't necessarily so nefarious or so, some of these bigger issues like voter suppression and things like that. Sometimes it ultimately comes down to mechanical issues, incompetence. These are things that we have to sort of deal with as they come up.
And the setup is sort of similar to Documenting Hate, where you have a combination of tips coming in as well as newsrooms partnering up. Is that sort of the basic mechanism?
Yeah, so we will do it the same way we did the past couple rounds, which is we collect tips during early voting and election day to be able to report things out, things that are happening in real time, so that we can send them to partners around the country. But we're also going to be trying to gather as much data as we can, since we're starting early this year, to see what we can learn about election systems before the election, so that local reporters can actually do some work before October on this.
Right. I was going to say, do you do much about the primaries? I mean, we have Iowa coming up, and a couple of states will be going to primaries in February. Do you do anything with the primaries, or just strictly speaking on focused on the general election?
Our focus is mostly on the general election, but what we're hoping to do this year is some more robust reporting in the first 3 quarters of the year, to be able to see what it is we can look at before election day, particularly if there are problems that we can identify that could be rectified before election day.
So your background as a journalist, but now you're sort of in this project manager kind of role. Is this something that, you just kind of gravitated to and you really like it? Do you kind of miss sort of nuts and bolts reporting, or this also is nuts and bolts reporting?
So this role I originated and sort of made it my own. So it's really a hybrid role that involves reporting, because so much of what we do is research and reporting to help spread that information. So it's really, it's the kind of role where I sort of have to let go of my ego a little bit, because so much of what I do ultimately ends up in the hands of other reporters. For Documenting Hate, I did report a bunch of stories or contribute to a bunch of stories, which was fun and I enjoyed. But the bulk of what I'm working on is ultimately stuff that I'm getting out to other newsrooms. But I think that's part of the fun, is to be able to do journalism that's ending up at 100 different newsrooms and in 100 different stories, rather than just to sort of hoard things for yourself.
Right. You're like a syndicated author at this point.
Yeah.
How do newsrooms, if they wanted to partner up with Electionland, like, what's the best way or mechanism for them to do that?
So we're going to have a sign-up form very soon. Hopefully, I'm hoping in the next week, certainly in the month of January, so that people will be able to sign up, either editors on behalf of their reporters or reporters themselves will be able to just fill out their information on there, which will be the quickest and easiest way to do that.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, I know that you are also an instructor. You're a journalism instructor. And so often there's a disconnect between young readers and journalism, especially the type of journalism that newsrooms have traditionally produced. And I was just kind of curious if one informs the other. Like, does your role as an instructor help inform some of the things that you sort of push for at ProPublica, or vice versa?
Well, I think what we do at ProPublica has informed what I teach, because a lot of what I teach is focused on engagement and ways that we can do reporting in new and interesting ways. So I think that is a big thing, and we have a bunch of different people from ProPublica who teach engagement reporting in some fashion in various universities, and also we go to conferences and things like that. So I think that's a big thing, is our approach to, we do a huge amount of crowdsourcing, not just for these collaborative projects, but for all of our journalism. So that's something we really try to teach and show how others can do that, or sort of adopt that sort of mindset of thinking when you start out on a project or a story. I think something that informed my thinking coming from teaching is that I taught an undergraduate class that was open to both journalism students and non-journalism students. And so these are kids who are like between 18 and 21. And I asked them during one class what news outlets they read or consumed on a regular basis, and almost none of them did. A couple of them watched Vice News on a regular basis, but for the most part, they were not consuming news. So that was a bit of a shock to me, considering about some of them were journalism students. So I try to think about that a lot, particularly when we're trying to target younger folks for call-outs or for whatever kind of reporting we're working on, and to think about our distribution strategy too, of we have to be more creative about how we reach people.
Right. It's such a challenge because news is finding them. They're not sort of seeking out news in a traditional sense, and that's very challenging. So to get us out on was, in addition to Electionland, I know the Philadelphia Inquirer, where I work, have partnered with ProPublica on a couple of stories where they've used national data to sort of bolster a local story. What are some current projects that are going on now at ProPublica that might not be as big as Electionland or Documenting Hate, but that newsrooms across the country might benefit from or be able to get involved in?
So another big sort of collaborative effort we have is called the Local Reporting Network. And this is a program where local outlets can apply to co-report with us for a year. So they pitch an investigation that they would like to work on. A reporter at that outlet is assigned to just work on that for a year. And then they work with ProPublica to report those stories, and we co-publish everything. So I think we are about to open up a new round. We have sort of rolling applications throughout the year. We have one bucket that's dedicated to State House reporting, and then another bucket that's just general investigations. So that's something I would really encourage people to look into, because it's a really fun opportunity to be able to work with us while continuing to work in your home newsroom. And something that we're actually hoping to do with Electionland this year is we might actually be able to do a smaller version of that for election reporting. We'd work with a couple local newsrooms to report probably just like 1 or 2 stories, since we're only running for a year. So we're actually hoping to do some of that. We will have more information about that when we officially launch later this month. But that's just something to keep in mind. And then we do, as you mentioned, individual partnerships. So we might co-publish a story with another outlet if it's relevant to their region, or work together with reporters at that outlet to co-report a story. And those are done sort of on a case-by-case basis. But if there's a big investigation that people are working on they think might be relevant to us, they can always contact an editor at ProPublica. We have a page. Let me just double check. This is the we have a page on the site that has all the ways that you can work with us. Yeah, so it's propublica.org/collaborate. And that has a sort of a list of all the different things that you can do to work with us.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, I was going to say, you don't want to give an email address. You're going to get inundated here. So is there anything else that you wanted to discuss about either Electionland or Documenting Hate or anything else in the ProPublica universe?
I would just say that there are more and more collaborations happening, particularly at the local level, that luckily are getting funded this year. So there's this big collaborative journalism summit that happens every year now. Last year it was in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Since there is this wonderful collaboration that is happening there that has sort of grown into this bigger, longer term thing. This year it's going to be in North Carolina because there's a bunch of local collaborations happening there. So I would just say that when there is an opportunity to work in some kind of collaborative project, even if it's short term, whatever the case may be, the more newsrooms start to participate in these, I think the more appetite there will be to continue to work in those types of projects. And it certainly gives folks the opportunity, particularly who may not have worked on these before, to see how beneficial they can be. So getting your feet wet is the first step. And I think that projects like Documenting Hate in Electionland are a good way to do that because there's so little that you actually have to do. There's no reporting requirement. It's free. There's no sort of written agreement that you have to get your lawyers to sign. So projects like ours are a really good way to test the waters in your organization to get people interested in doing these types of collaborations.
See, editors, it's easy. Just do it. Collaborate. Great. Thanks, Rachel. I really appreciate you taking up the time, and thanks for talking on the EMP Reports podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.